Blood-Soaked Rapture, Part 1. Fracturing. Day 1. Flitting in fear, a day's exhaustion, a single, deliberate cut. 1. Stuck in a prison of his own. Part 1. Jacob was curled tight as a straining fist in the tiny ochre light of the outside streetlight which hazily glowed through the thin curtains. Entangled in the splashes of jutting blood spilling from the ruined neck, his dream self devoured sloppily at the ruined human. The monstrous, gaunt skulls of the other feeding creatures licked their tongues at him in animalistic pleasure, and he watched them pierce through the wrist of a pleading hand, trying to swipe them away weakly. The rutting squelch moved his gaze downward, staring with a dizzying humour at the wound he was penetrating. It was a grossly chewed-apart side of a large stomach. Some of the pale pinkish fat slopped grappling hands of flesh around his pale cock. The decimated pools of bloody sinew and intestines lubricated him as he satiated every pleasurable sensation. The sickness, a pounding and sick fear cooled around him, but he was well practiced in nightmares that pursued him, that forced him to stay in their games, pretending he'd woken. And wearily, with what little consciousness he had, Jacob drove his eyes upwards as hard as he could. In a fit of jerking motions, he drove himself away from the organic waste pile and the wrongness of physical pleasures there. The dark was absolute, save for the thin line of white from the light in the apartment hallway outside his front door. He turned away from that glow, much more content in the weighted blankness of being in the darkness. The cold fact that if he kept himself remaining in the dark, if there were monsters, they wouldn't flail him apart unless they were alerted by the glow of a light or the sound of his movement. Tightened, he allowed the cold rationality of his grogged mind to walk across the familiarity of the Lord's Prayer, and the choral sound in the low light of a service which was his first memory. He fell back into a meditative calm, his lips tracing the words of a prayer, even when the rest of him flopped slack into his dream state again. It was only a moment's pause, and another world which felt more real than his normal life to envelop him, and lo, Jacob growled into a new horror. The wet rock spilled from his wading feet like so much spoiled fruit, squelching around his hands, and slowly his heavy head tilted up on its aching traps, heaving the tightly embracing armoured child, pulling his distended limbs around him. With a deep sigh, he gave in for a moment, hiding himself behind the pile of rocks as so much porridge, riddled with the bones of the long-dead corpses of what the unstoppable disease had eaten away at, just as it has its sense of loyalty, and any semblance of order in the small embers of resistance that burned the defiant flames in the dredges of the ruined world. He stared at the shimmering gold in the child's remaining eye, the other side of its face, and down through the left shoulder was a crushed ruin from where it dragged the flailing body furiously away from the things which writhed in the diseased forest which grew in the remains of the corpse piles. Such piles had slowly peeled free a low-minded brute who instinctively protected the grown plants and fed rapidly on anything still writhing and screaming within the tide of lancing fangs and clawing lengths of spit. The hurt oozed out of him in a longer sigh as he walked through the intelligence still present in the bright gaze. They didn't need words. They had an understanding aching through them as you learned the most about your body when you were forced to fight for your survival and exhausted. A strained self remained in a physical purity where you both found yourself stopping, moving to new cover, or knowing when to leave one of your group behind, all done without words, for what a waste of their fading shreds of energy words would be. There was a lancing memory of lit bones staring at its ruined body as the young child learned its voice as it screamed, summoning the blazing fire of its conjuring at the heights of its suffering. Linked now, Jacob watched the child's memory clarifying his bright silhouette from the clouds of battered exhaustion. Jacob had been the only one continuing forward, addicted to their faith he'd find someone and save them, claw the tiniest thing back from the bleak clouds which had broken his kin down to soldiers who executed people for simply trying to configure a radio, in the hopes others out in the deep dark of the cloying clouds still held on to their sanity like their camp did. The other bodies around the child had been chewed apart slabs, and their bodies didn't conjure anything in the height of adrenaline, pushing them against decimated consciousness, holding on against all odds until the shimmering sight grabbed them, and the flames exploded from their ethereal tongues lapping the esoteric vowels. In that impossible sight of neon tones, Jacob slowly appeared like a living boulder, a great bulk engorged in the paranoia of the crumbling countries, with the tide of disease feeling as if it was pressing on his skin at any moment. The paranoia, the irregular tightening of his chest as his mind sprinted into panic as he imagined any firework as the ordnance of a merciless UN. A passing car lit the imagined flames of a coming riot, and down to the weights he descended again.